maybe we'll just go down the line first, and I'd like for each of you to introduce yourself, where you work, and then how you're using crowdsourcing at your different institutions. Although you know this so much, girls, so we might jump right past you again. So, okay. It should be just on. Maybe it needs to be closer.
Good?
Yeah.
Awesome. So my name is Greta Martinez. I work at United Way of Miami-Dade. I'm in charge of our giving communities. What are they? They are basically people like you and I that decide to donate their time, talents, and resources to our organization. And so I am tasked with coming up with creative ways to engage them and get closer to our work. Oh, and how we're using crowdsourcing already? Okay, cool. So conceptually, United Way has been doing crowdsourcing since it started. It just wasn't digital. So I like to think that adopting crowdsourcing as a digital tool was just a natural step for us. And the donor group that we selected are digital natives. So it was just a great fit to engage them in this new way.
You remember our So Much Girls from 5 minutes ago?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. So hi, everybody. My name is Greg Castella. So I'm Innovation Coordinator in Doctors Without Borders Switzerland. So you most probably heard about Doctors Without Borders already, but just to tell you that Doctors Without Borders is providing health care to people affected by catastrophes, being natural ones or man-made ones, namely conflicts. And the way we use crowdsourcing, so we created this platform called ThinkUp, and we use it for like 3 main reasons. The first one is to actually crowdsource ideas and incubate innovative ideas from our staff, but also to gather needs. So because maybe people have a problem, but without having already a solution. So there's also some kind of a channel for needs. And finally, also to create communities of practice in the sense that it's also a place to share stuff, problems, and a solution that is working already, and to share it with the community of Doctors Without Borders.
Thank you. I'm Krista Worley with sno-isle Libraries in Washington State. We're a regional public library system covering 2 counties just north of Seattle. And we have 2 islands, and did I say 2,200 square miles? It's big. And my job is to make sure that the work that we do has measurable outcomes towards our strategic plan. And we're using IdeaScale to hear the voice of the customer from our employees and really make sure that what we're implementing has measurable change from the customer's perspective. And we're getting more sophisticated and starting to work on more targeted campaigns and hopefully use it next year to develop our strategic plan with public input.
So I think one of the nice things about being the people up here on this panel is one of the challenges when you're trying to get people to engage is getting them to care about the problem that you need solved. But in some ways, you guys already have that built in because you're mission-driven organizations. But how is that informing how you shape some of your communications initiatives? Who wants to talk first?
Sure, I can. You're looking at me, so
Yeah.
challenge accepted. So it's interesting because I was thinking a lot about what you just said just now, and just because we're mission-driven doesn't automatically mean that people care.
Right.
And so, because if it were, then I wouldn't have a job. So, my work directly impacts how much people, how connected they are to the work. And there are a million ways that you can drive mission, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit. And I think that one of the most successful ways across the board is to involve your stakeholders at every point of your communications plan. So for example, for us, it's not that it's a nice to have our volunteers and our volunteer boards engage, it's a must-have. So from the inception of anything, so with crowdsourcing, it was essential for us to make sure that we had the buy-in of our volunteers. So if you're not too familiar with United Way, we are made up, all United Ways across the world, which are over 1,800 of them, they're made up of volunteer boards. So people like you and I can serve on a volunteer board for United Way, donate our time or our money, and we make decisions on programs that are going to positively impact the community, right? And so for us, it was essential to have the buy-in of the committee that we were going to be engaging in the crowdsourcing platform from the get-go. And then the first thing that we did for messaging was to find out what they care about, right? So surveyed them, very easy through email, asking what do you care about, had some meetings, and then we identified they cared about health in the community. And then so from there, we crafted our problem, our question, from within our health investments, and then also went forward into, which is something that I think has been shared here also, into letting them know how they were going to be rewarded tangibly and intangibly by participating.
And it's interesting because you're a public community, so you're engaging the public, but Greg, are you engaging employees?
Yes, we mainly, well, we're uniquely engaging employees, so that really the tool was developed to find a way, because one of the challenge we have is that our staff is spread over many different countries and working in places where actually it's not so easy to access. So many companies create a physical lab where the people can meet and do a workshop and co-create together. And for us, it's not possible. Otherwise, it would be only the people from the headquarters, actually. So that's really one of the main reasons why we wanted to use a crowdsourcing platform, was to create this kind of virtual lab, actually, for the people to be able to log in and to start working together and collaborating.
And because they're so distributed, how are you telling them about that and letting them know and getting them on there?
Well, we have to actually. I have to say that we're in the beginning of using the platform, but well, it's just to identify some touch points and then to send messages again and again and again. I have to say that there's also a cultural change, like using that kind of platform rather than going the normal hierarchical way. And so that's also, if I could identify a challenge, that's maybe the the largest challenge.
The cultural shift that needs to happen. And for you, Krista?
So we're 4.5 years in, and we get plenty of ideas. That I think people want a voice, and that was one of the goals of us implementing this process, was to let people be heard. So we're not really lacking for that, but it is part of our onboarding process. So employees just learn about it on day one, that this is a way that they can circumvent that hierarchy maybe, or if they just don't know, because we're so big. We have 500 some employees over 23 places. So, yeah. And then we do regular newsletters. We have our own space in our newsletter, and so our peer review team is always writing new ways to get people involved.
And I know that bulletin that you showed in your presentation, was that the original piece of communications that you guys received and saw?
Yeah, so that was the first piece that the CEC broadcasted. So actually, an instructor at my university had posted that directly on our Blackboard, and that's how we were able to get connected. So that was the first engagement point for us.
And my feeling is, if you hadn't seen it there, would you have known about the challenge?
No.
Which I think underlines how important partnerships are, especially when doing public outreach. I wanted to talk, it's interesting, ROI is one of the key topics at Open Nation this year. And I think that you guys have some very interesting examples of how you measure the success of these programs that aren't maybe the typical ways to measure it. You want to start, Krista? We'll go this way this time.
All right, so one of the things that we wanted to do was develop our staff understanding of our strategic plan. And how do you measure that? I mean, like, you could survey, do you know what this means? But we really, it was like thinking. We're measuring a different way of thinking rather than something that you can test for. So we have a peer review team. It's 7 members, and they cycle through, so we're engaging a lot of staff to be part of the process. And one measurement we were looking for, is this actually increasing people's understanding? So we exit interview people when they leave the team, and then we kind of watch their trajectory. And so I did look it up. Over half of the participants on our peer review team, which is from all different levels in the organization, have been promoted internally. If I include people who took jobs in other places that were promotions, it's 60%. So I fibbed to her a little bit last night. So that's one way that we've been able to measure the return on this investment.
Yeah, I believe that you had some results to share from your initial health initiative.
Yeah, so on a personal level, Intangible, it raised awareness for myself. So I'm going to backtrack. I'm going to go from implementation, the actual outcome of our crowdsourcing pilot program that we invested in, versus implementation to IDEA. So our actual outcome was an urban farm that was erected in an area. It's the city of Opelika in Miami-Dade County. I had no idea that this city existed. And so throughout this process, Intangible, it raised awareness for myself and also for people that were involved that maybe didn't know that there was, 30 minutes north of them, this area where it's 16,000 residents, it's considered a food desert, and most people there get their food from 2 discount supermarkets and neighborhood stores that have, for the most part, prepackaged unhealthy foods, right? And so Intangible, definitely raising awareness. And then tangible, we were able, from the ideas collected, there were actually several people that had suggested having a urban garden where community members could take, food from, and also local incubators. And so that actual farm was built from an idea, several ideas that were submitted on the platform. We were able to secure a sponsorship for $5,000 to build out the farm, and then also, which I think to us was very important, is to secure volunteer hours. So we had over 200 volunteer hours, 2 different groups, one corporate and one individual, that were able to keep us at a low overhead cost and build out this urban farm.
And as you said, Greg, you're just getting started. And that's the nice thing, too. I feel like you're the freshest face on this panel in terms of IdeaScale usage, and Krista's been with us for a long time. But how are you going to plan on measuring outcomes?
Well, actually, I have to say that at the moment we're rather focusing on driving commitment and traffic on the platform rather than. But we defined a couple of metrics regarding the usage of the platform, and then it will be, well, the most important thing will be which ID will really be scaled up within the organization, and so that will be the main thing. But just maybe one thing about engagement in MSF, we obviously have people that are super engaged, so they really believe in the mission of the association, and they're actually maybe too engaged. The problem is that one of the main challenge I see regarding innovation in general and using the platform is that the people, they just don't have time, because there is always an emergency, there is a lot of priorities, and that's actually we are thinking about. And I found really the presentation this morning very inspiring, particularly the one from FDA, to find ways for engaging with people. Yeah, so thanks a lot.
And then for you ladies at So Much, you're finding new ways to demonstrate value, that it's not just about how much revenue, although that's awesome, but you're at 57,000? Mm-hmm. Yeah. But so what are some of the other ways that you measure success?
So our success, like Ray said, it's going to be not only just partnerships, so how engaged we are with other companies and organizations, but also that food diversion rate. So we, every day that we're collecting our brown rice quinoa, collecting that juice pulp, we keep that tracked. And then we also like you said, through sales, we're also looking at launching more of an educational campaign. So kind of not only getting people inspired, but people involved in reducing the food waste. So we really want to start engaging the public more to show that you can have a tangible object that you can really help make an impact. So we'll start measuring that to have a specific metric on that. We're still building that one out, but.
Education as a metric, I like that. Maybe you could tell me about one idea that's made it to launch we'll start with you, Krista, and then I guess you could tell us another one if you have another one too, Greta.
We have a lot. There's simple things like moving printers to a different location in the building because of traffic flow. But one place that we've really seen some interesting ideas is reaching a strategic goal we have, which is improving kindergarten readiness in our community. And we have this kind of open call for ideas, but in our custom questions, so for submitting an idea, we ask people to identify what the measurable outcome is going to be in strategy, so that we're kind of trying to hone people's thinking. And we don't really expect a 16-year-old page to understand measurable outcome, but we're asking the question, and then once the idea has been submitted, that peer review panel can kind of foster their thinking around that and think, how would you measure that? So we have a goal to increase kindergarten readiness, and we look at community indicators. So we're looking at the state Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction's classroom figures for kindergarten readiness when they're testing in. And we can pull our schools, target schools in our 17 school districts, and watch their scores change over time. So we can let our frontline staff know that this is where we're trying to affect change. How might you get there? And so people have lots of ideas about, well, maybe we should stop doing our story times in the library, because we know that our target audience are 0 to 5-year-olds and caregivers who are not in organized care, right? So a lot of Boys and Girls Clubs and things bring their kids into the library, but what about the kids who are not ever getting exposed? And so they're generating ideas. Well, I think we see those kids at the skate park in the afternoon. Maybe we need to go read books there. And so that's the kind of thing that we're seeing. And I think we haven't measured that one yet, but we're getting there.
Greta.
I think that's really great about activating library spaces. We recently had an event at one of our county libraries, and again, raising awareness and just educating people on how libraries themselves are changing. It's not just a place where you go and check out a book. Actually, it's probably the last thing that you're going to do, just because of the technology and everything, so that's really great. Another idea, aside from the urban farm, that we were able to capture is also simple things. It's great, you can have a farm that the community can use, but how are we going to make sure that it's being used? Who is going to be able to keep track, and how sustainable is it? What are we going to do with it? So some of the ideas were leverage using color from the different produce at the farm. There's a school nearby, an elementary school, so it's get produce from the farm with the children and then be able to use color as a way to learn about healthy eating. So that was one idea, very simple, and I was very quite taken because the person that submitted the idea, he had a picture of his kid with different vegetables and fruits, and so I'm happy to say that that was one of the ideas that was implemented. The school actually went out twice now, I think, so this was last year. And the urban farm itself now is being maintained by a group of volunteers that are also volunteering their time. And through a grant, we've been able to hire somebody to also take care of it.
And for so much, what was something that CEC did that made it possible for you to get to launch and not just stay an idea in the IdeaScale system?
Yeah, so definitely fostering in that mentorship of building our plan, so know what we need to do to actually implement, and then also the funding as for the seed funding as well. So, and they've held us accountable, saying what exactly what expenses do you need, where are you spending this, and they kept. We had to do monthly and a 6-month and a year check-in as well to see where we actually are in the phase. After we were selected.
Were you exactly as you predicted, or were things
there
different?
There was a few things that we didn't foresee, but for the most part, through the detailed organization that they had us go through, we had probably at least 85% of what we needed. Right. That roadmap that I created I created a month after we had gotten back from Canada presenting our idea, and it was a majority from there, and we just step by step put it together to get our product to market.
Let's talk about what your biggest challenge is right now in terms of either your mission or crowdsourcing, and how you're going to approach solving that. Who wants to start?
Yeah, so maybe as I spoke about it before already, I think one of the, now starting using the platform, we received some feedback especially from managers saying, connecting on the platform and coming back to me and saying, but how is it possible? There's stuff on the platform that I'm not even aware of. And also people asking, yeah, but are we going to continue using emails, or are we going to do everything on the platform? Kind of panicking about the fact that maybe everything will not be on emails anymore. So I think the main challenge for us, it's true that IdeaScale, it's a tool, but then there is the whole cultural change that is behind that will actually needs quite a lot of investment to change. Yeah.
Do you have a team that's working on building culture to make that
Yeah,
shift?
we have a couple of people working on cultural change. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sure. So I think broadly, and this is something that I'm taking from, she sits on the Boston City Council, and her name escapes me right now, but she said, those closest to the pain should be closest to the solution, right? And so I think conceptually, just for anybody that's doing crowdsourcing, regardless of your stakeholder, that's something that, and maybe it's not pain, substitute pain for, if it's employee-based, it could be pain points, but it could also be something positive. And it's how do we, for us, we engaged our volunteers externally, but then also throughout the process, we realized that we didn't so much engage the people that were in Opalaka, right? So missing that point was actually great because we were able to learn from it. And so going forward, if we do engage in another crowdsourcing campaign, we need to make sure that we are engaging the people and the stakeholders that are going to be directly benefiting from anything coming out of it.
So I'm a process junkie, and this is going to be the most boring answer ever, probably. And Jessica will truly understand it because we made a process map before we chose a platform, and it's tedious. It's crazy. But I think one of our greatest challenges is staying true to that process, which is part of changing our organizational culture rather than becoming dependent on the platform. So one of our original goals was to make sure that our employees understand that we're using an evidence-based decision-making process and encourage managers or idea owners to communicate evidence in the decision that they share as a result of an idea's workflow through the community. So. And what we did, we looked at the new reporting dashboard, and what we saw just from the dashboard, so the numbers told us that we had about half of the ideas that we selected to implement were actually completed. And I'm not saying implemented, I mean completed, meaning we made a decision and communicated that decision so that employees were no longer spinning on that thing. They could move on to the next idea that they were going to have. And so that really showed us that we were not doing a good job of following through all the way to the end of our process, which was communicating those decisions and wrapping things up. So we made a concerted effort with this little peer review team to follow up with managers and remind them that these things were hanging out there, and so we could just watch that gap. Yeah, and now it's a flat line, so.
And what about you guys? What's your biggest challenge right now with building your new business?
A challenge with a startup. So many. The list goes on and on. But I would say probably for us is that there's no playbook for this type of business. So we're kind of innovating as we're moving forward. So we're having to validate a lot of our assumptions and figure out like what it is, if we're going on the right path, if we should continue just doing flour, doing a product as well. So for us, I would definitely say is that we don't know what's the next step because no one's ever done this before.
Well, before we open it up to questions from everybody, if we could go down and you could say, if you were going to try and change the world with crowdsourcing for good, what's the piece of advice you'd want to give to somebody to do that? Well, you've all been doing it. You've learned something.
It's always begin with the end in mind. So know what that social impact you're trying to make is. What is the change you're trying to see? And then design your campaign to deliver on that.
For me, I think, to change the world, I don't know, but at least maybe to change your company or your organization. And that's really what I've been always advocating for at MSF, is to keep the process as open as possible, really, and to be accountable to your community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'd say something similar like that. Our idea had been shot down several times to just keep pushing, and that sometimes the craziest ideas like actually work. So keep inspiring and kind of creating a place where all the ideas can kind of come together.
And I'd say keep listening if you're employers of bright-eyed people such as yourselves. Yeah.
For me, I would say, at least what I've noticed for us, making sure the backbone of the company is profit with a purpose driven. And that's really helped us.
Yeah, I agree with everyone. And if I could add something, it would be to focus to, yes, definitely involve everybody. You're not going to do it alone. Involve everybody at every step of the way from the beginning. Be creative and focus on the story, the narrative, because that's what people remember.
Right, maybe, no. Why don't we just ask questions? Who's first? Yeah. And then you'll just lean into it.
Any questions for our panel?
Oh, you don't need a projection.
More Doctors Without Borders. Having staff to help manage the culture change. Is there sort of an outline plan that you have? And how are you measuring that?
So actually, those people that work in cultural change, they're more. We don't have an office that is working on cultural change as such. So they're more like dedicated to specific projects with an important dimension of a cultural change. So we don't, at the moment, we don't have anybody regarding using crowdsourcing. We don't have anybody. So we are doing it actually. Yeah. And so I have to say we're not yet at the place where we're able to measure it.
Any other questions for our panelists?
Yeah, everybody's agree.
Yes.
So, to all of you, but specifically working in the libraries, I hear you talking about such a comprehensive organization flow
For the ideas you're taking in and developing on. So my question to you is, how did you come to that process? How did you come to that workflow? Is it something you've iterated on over time? And again, this is to all of you, but I hear you speaking to it directly. Is it something you iterated on over time? And where did you get that V1?
So it really started I think I've told some of you this story already. We had an in-service day for all of our staff, and we had this session led by our deputy director who wanted to carry an idea forward. And how many of you have been in that room where you generate ideas on a flip chart? And then you never see the flip chart again. And so that was what was happening, right? And that's normal. This is brainstorming. And one of our employees from a very small remote location said, well, if my idea doesn't get selected, I want to know what's going to happen to it. And it was kind of like one of those wake-up moments. And the deputy director heard that and said, that's what we're going to address. That's the one thing that we're taking out of this room. And then she turned to me and said, so go make that happen. I was like, So I just started talking to people about what is this? What do we need? Researching. Oh, there's a thing called idea management. Who knew that? I mean, really, libraries are not with it as far as that, but we are getting there, and now we're at the table. And we just talked to focus groups. I went out and talked to libraries. I talked to pages. I talked to every position, to leadership team members, managers, and asked them what they needed, what were their values. And we just started pulling that together and then made this process map. And honestly, it was pretty comprehensive. We've used the same process since 2015. So there have been little tweaks, and Jessica had a ton of questions about it, which forced some improvement. But it's been pretty solid because it was based on a lot of input from the very beginning.
And is the process map something that defines how ideas are routed or how ideas are reviewed? Does it end with a space where you can then report out on the outcome, whether it was a go or a no-go, and why?
Yes.
Okay, so what does that look like?
Well, it's really just our workflow. Right. So it goes from ideate to completion or implementation. And it ends either into a category like trend watching. So our ideas are tagged so we can go back and say, hey, what were we thinking about last year? Did we ever really do anything about that at a kind of macro level? And then the other place that ends is our project management process. So it comes out of being an idea and into initiating a project. Is that answering your question at all?
Yes, that answers my question. All right, any other questions? Laszlo?
Doctors Without Borders is a remarkable institution. It
learning every single day as you explore the fringes of our world and try and serve people in need. So you had a part of your platform that was best practices you were sharing. Can you share sort of what you're expecting out of that, and what an example of a kind of best practice? How do I deal with Ebola or things like that? Are they medical best practice, administrative best practice, all of that?
It's actually, we decided from the beginning not to decide or to restrict to a specific field. Obviously, many of the ideas or the best practices are related in some way with medical practices, because we are Doctors Without Border. But here the idea is that MSF is an organization that is quite decentralized. So like replication, duplication is kind of a problem for us. So that's the idea here, is to really be able to build on the experience, on the experiences of others. And because in reality now, something that is tested in one mission in South Sudan, let's say, it might be tested again and again and again in 3 different countries, because the people just don't know. And so that's really the idea, to share obviously successful projects, but also insightful failures and lessons learned. So obviously this will be a bit more, in the beginning I guess people will be more likely to share successes, because it's more, you look better when you share success, but we really hope that they will also share like failures.
So is it safe to say then that some of the ideas submitted are really contributions to this community of maybe even just best practices or shared learnings or things that have actually already been tested, not so much a seed idea that needs to be win funding to be implemented, but they just want to share, hey, this is what I did and this is what I learned. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
So we have those different channels. One is really like brand new ideas that we need to test. And this other channel is really like projects. We call it projects worth sharing. And it's really, the idea is to build some kind of a community of practice around different subjects.
Great. All right, anyone else? Okay, oh, yes.
Practical question.
My name is Julie. I work with the Air Force. So with all of this leftover food, how do they get the food to you?
So we provide the chefs with a container, and then at the end of the night, the chefs put all of the excess grain from the rice cooker into the container. They then store it into their walk-in refrigerator. The following morning, our crew comes by, picks up all of the containers. We then take all of that to our commercial kitchen, where we then begin to dehydrate, grind, and then mill into flour. Something that we learned throughout this process is that most of these restaurants are all owned by the same entity. And so P.F. Chang's, Street Food Kitchen, Payway, BJ's, they all are usually within a 2-mile radius within each other in every major metropolitan city. So it's really nice for us. I just make a little pickup round, and then we take our food and take it to our kitchen. So that had taken time to get the chefs used to, instead of throwing rice into a trash can, to just put it into a container. As crazy as that sounded, it took about a month to get the chefs used to doing that. But now they're in the habit, and we just have such a system. They label everything, they keep it sanitized, they put it in proper containers, temperature zones are all sanitary, so it's really well. We're working with professional chefs, so it makes it easier for us as well.
Great. Any other questions? Process-oriented?
Yes. Actually, can I make a comment?
Yes.
Lynn Tedesco, United Way Worldwide, the mothership for United Ways. And I just wanted to comment on, because Greta is such a great innovation pioneer, we were able to implement an idea by partnering with her and able to do a 360 video.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That was cool.
It was an idea from a separate crowdsourcing campaign that we were doing.
I totally forgot about that, but yeah, that was really great.
I want to shout out United Way too. I mentioned that community indicators, right? So we want to look beyond the library and look at the change from what's important to stakeholders in our community. And United Way is one of ours. So in our civic engagement strategy, we want to increase volunteerism, and we use United Way data, their volunteerism rates, to look at whether we're contributing, not causing, but contributing to some kind of change. So yay, thank you for being out there and having good data.
one thought that this reminded me of is last year I remember some folks were talking about, well, how can some of the organizations that are here, a lot of people are doing innovation within their organization, across their organization, so many large organizations here. But I imagine there are probably also some organizations that might be able to partner and do innovation together, or maybe externally, exchanging ideas between the organizations as well. So some of what your remarks there reminded me of that, and in particular that United Way is a huge, complex organization that also has sub-organizations as well, and that operate independently of one another and are able to exchange ideas between one another by staying closely in touch. So any other thoughts, comments, contributions, ideas, questions from anyone? Okay. Great. So should we move then into announcements? Do you have closing remarks for this?
No, that was it.
Okay.
That was the whole show.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank our panel.